Hello, upper middle browsers. Dukes here, coming at you from my peaceful Mar Vista backyard, more of a Chattahoochee patio, here with my beautiful lime tree. I have a special announcement, which is that coming up quite soon, we're going to have another draft. A draft is where Chris and I pick, in this case, I think the next 15 or 16 works that we consider, and it's going to be a live draft that you can join. And if you join, you get to participate. We're going to have a voting round where listeners will choose one of the series. It's fun. Chris and I both show up and we both pitch series to each other, and then we take a vote. But this time the listeners will get to weigh in and pick one of the series as well. That is going to be October 10th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. That would be 8 p.m. Eastern time. It'll probably take close to 2 hours, maybe 90 minutes. We'll try to keep it moving briskly. And if you attend, I promise there will be a door prize for everybody who attends as well. We'll do it as like a Zoom webinar or something like that. The details will be on the website, uppermiddlebrow.com, so keep checking. And mark the date on your calendar, and we hope to see you there. And I'm going to just let you enjoy some of these early fall. Technically, it's still summer for like a day. Oh, yeah. Today's the equinox. Or tomorrow. Days are definitely getting shorter. The nights are definitely getting cooler. And while sometimes I find that depressing, I actually had a nice, long, sunny, warm summer, and I'm looking forward to some cooler weather. So, I hope wherever you are, you got a nice, long summer too, and that you are also looking forward for some cozy, cool weather. On with the show.
Take down all the old buildings, fence off around the old house. You can keep this house on a block for yourselves. Still get great views to the river from the back bedrooms. Chop down the cherry orchard and...
Chop down? Excuse me, young man, but do you have any idea what kind of rank garbage you were talking?
Yeah, night bag.
Yep.
Right. Well, your would be like where you keep your spare jousting poles. The night bag.
No, I keep those in the dick bag.
Why would you keep your jousting?
I mean, you say jousting pole.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Now you've gone down to 12 years old.
Yeah. We're just going to
keep. I was being a little bit sophisticated with my humor.
But a significant chunk.
Hey, I mean, we're talking about Chekhov. And certainly, like, if we were to go back to Shakespeare, there are plenty of D jokes to be had.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in this production, like, they take that chunk of text between Lubov and Trofimov and make it like explicitly sexual. And really take it in a direction that you're like, oh, whoa, okay, I didn't think that we were going to go that far. So it is, we're in a grand, that's one of the cool things.
This is one of the questions I actually have for you as somebody who has been in sort of the world of drama brought into this culture, but maybe we ought to save that because I guess I feel like It's funny. It seems to me that there are a lot of understandings about the romantic subtext here that I didn't necessarily pick up from the page, and I think are maybe just they're just sort of known as part of the oral history of theater. In a sort of like, Stanislavski and the Moscow Theater did it this way in 1914, and I'm trying to Sandy Meisner saw them do it that way and taught his actor, and I forget the other the other two sort of famous acting teachers from the 50s and 60s. There's Meisner. There's the woman.
What is her name? Stella Adler.
And there's Stella Adler, and then there's the guy who played Hyman Roth in the other, kind of the three of them. There's a great book called The Method that came out a couple of years ago.
I have an answer for you, but I think I could answer it now, but we could also come back to it as well.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know. I think it's an interesting answer. I'm not sure, but it sort of came to me as you were talking about it because, yeah, I think there's something to be said about that. But yeah.
Well, should we just get into it?
Let's just get into it. I mean, let's do a very quick recap. This is a play. One
of the things I thought we could tell. I mean, we could do the plot, and then the other thing I think we could do that would build on last time is we could name the cast, and maybe give one or two notes about how each character is portrayed.
Yeah.
By each of those actors. So, well, I mean, super quick plot recap. We did this last time. The noble lady, Lubov, comes home from Paris to her sort of provincial country home where she grew up as a child. She has with her daughter, Anya, her brother, Gaev, a few servants. Waiting for her is Lopakin and some of the other, and her stepdaughter, Varia. And very significantly, this merchant, Lopakin, I guess I mentioned him, and some other neighbors and other followers. It's a big to-do. She gets home. She's exhausted, but she's excited to be home. But very quickly, we learn that the house that she is staying in, the manor, the estate, is underwater on the mortgage. And if she doesn't come up with a plan, it's going to be sold at auction in a few months. And that's pretty much Act 1. As we talked about last time, Lopakin proposes a subdivision solution, cut down the cherry orchard, and he is scoffed at. Do you want to do Act 2?
Yeah, Act 2, the standard rap on Chekhov plays is that in Act 2, nothing happens, except I really think Act 2...
A lot of flirtation.
But also if we continue to look at everything through the lens of what would Neil Stephenson do. Chapter 2 is essentially like setting up chess pieces so they can be knocked over with great dramatic effect in Act 3.
I'm just imagining like a 12-hour play set in the steppes of Russia with like cryptocurrency and gold and wheat futures and
like there's
and
just
a German invasion. and
like,
right, a submarine in like Lake Baikal.
Lady Ranovskaya, we're going to have to sell your submarine.
What is this idiocy you're talking about? How else will I cruise on Lake Baikal in the beautiful summers? My fondest memories of my mother were taking me on submarine cruises.
I've loved the sound of the diving klaxon echoing among the fir trees of my youth. Awooga!
Take this barometer. It's 200 years old. Think of all the wonderful service it has done.
My God.
Wait, what am I doing? Lionizing a barometer. Yes. Well, so that's Act 2. Act 3.
To treat it somewhat seriously, Act 2 is where the ideas that Chekhov are trying to weave into the play in a tasteful and non-overt manner. Act 2 is where Chekhov really tries to do his showing. And
everybody sort of tells you who they are. And what their values are.
Yeah, and you get a few very powerful monologues to different effects from different people. And it's later it's early summer by Act 2, so the clock is ticking. There are some flirtations that occur, some relationships have developed, and like you said, we learn a lot about each of the characters, and we move from there into Act 3.
In Act 3, I found this a little confusing. It's happening as the auction is happening off scene. I couldn't really tell if it was happening in some other location. In this play, it's staged in their house. But essentially, most of the major characters are kind of entertaining themselves while this happens. There's a certain amount of drinking. the German governess Charlotte puts on a very impressive magic display and ventriloquism. And at the end of that, we learn that Lopakin, who has been trying to get Lyubov to sell the cherry orchard so that she can have some income, or try to get her to subdivide it, sell off several parcels or rent them off, and so that she can keep living there. She refuses to do it, and he manages to buy it, and he is very, very happy about that, although he also... It's poignant because this is heartbreaking for Lyubov, because she has to leave her beloved childhood home, as do her daughters and the retinue.
In most productions, it seems like the suggestion is that they're throwing a party because they assume that at the end of the day they will own the orchard again. It's supposed to be like a celebration of the.
Why do they? Oh, that's weird. But they should not think that, right? Like that.
Well,
that is
they shouldn't think that. But I mean, like.
Well, there is this. They all have this. The wealthy people all have this sort of attitude of like something will come up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's like they've been standing on a train track all summer long with a train bearing down on them, and they have decided to throw a party for the moment when the train diverts.
Well, and the neighbor, who was also in difficult financial straits, I forget his name.
Simoniev Pishik.
Actually is rewarded for his pointless optimism.
Yeah.
He actually makes out despite doing absolutely nothing to secure his good fortune. And then, Act 4, everybody leaves.
Yep. Yeah, everybody has to pack up and go because Lopakin is making good on his promise to cut down the orchard and subdivide it. And we get to see everybody go. And in sort of an inversion of Act 2, we are reminded of who everybody is. But we're also... There's a poignancy to it because we know this is the last time we're going to experience these characters, and that probably they're going to experience each other, which is brought to like a real driving the point home when the ancient servant Fears is forgotten in the locked orchard, in the locked estate house. And in most productions, he sort of dies on stage as the lights go down.
That's sad.
Yeah.
And the other sort of sad thing that happens, there's been this sense that Lopakin is going to propose to the stepdaughter, Varia, and he seems about to, and then the moment comes and he doesn't do it.
Yeah.
And she is sad. And actually, Lopakin's sort of emotional state in that moment is something I want to talk about later. But
yeah.
So our cast... why don't we'll do 3 in a row. How about?
Sure.
So, Dunyasha, the maid, the young maid, is played by Emily Tafe, I think is how you say her name. Lopakin is played by Conleth Hill, who I did not recognize as Lord Varys from Game of Thrones.
Holy shit.
Isn't that amazing?
Oh my God, you're right.
Yes. And I would say brilliantly. He is portrayed as vulnerable, bumbling, and sincere all at once. Pip Carter plays Yippee Hodoff as a kind of tall, actually kind of handsome buffoon, as he's written.
Charity Wakefield plays Anya, or Ingenue, and sort of, she's where like the hopes and dreams of the future are kind of located by other, usually male characters. The great Zoe Wanamaker is Lyubov Ranovskaya, the matriarch.
Absolutely makes the play. Just absolutely.
Just a stunning performance.
Carries the whole thing. Yeah. I mean, the other, none of the actors are bad. I mean, but she is insanely good.
It's one of those, like, it's one of those moments where it's either a brilliance of casting or direction or both, or just comedy, great ensemble play. Where everybody knows that the most important thing is that Lyubov gets the arias. That she, not Aria the character, but the operatic aria. Like, she gets the big moments that are, sometimes Trofimov gets something close to it, but he never really quite sticks the landing.
Well, I think Lopakin has a few moments like that.
He should,
too.
yeah.
But
Claudie Blakely plays Varia, to just heartbreaking effect.
Yep.
It's back to you.
James Lawrenson as Gaev, who manages to make Gaev a little more charming in person than I found him on the Mamet page anyway, the Mamet translation, as a sort of charmingly bumbled, addle-headed aristocrat. Mm-hmm. Sarah Woodward is Charlotta as a pretty stereotypical German governess. Tim McCullen is that right? Tim McCullen, is the student. No. Sorry, Tim McCullen is the Simeonov Pishik, the neighbor, who does great mustache work in this production.
And is the actor that sort of takes me the biggest distance from distaste to charmed.
He does also there are a number of glances that he gives other characters at various times that he gets a lot of mileage from his eye work and his mustache work.
Gerald Kidd plays a handsome and dangerous servant named Yasha, and to sort of simmering malevolent charisma, and I think he does a great job with that. Kenneth Cranham plays the ancient servant Fears, and Mark Bana plays Petya Trofimov, the eternal student, who kind of stands in for a sort of nascent socialism.
I'm trying to think of the name of the actor that the guy who plays Yasha reminds. Rufus Sewell. He's they got him because Rufus Sewell wasn't available.
Yeah,
he's basically like a really good approximation of Rufus Sewell.
Yeah, they were
if you ever saw what movie was he in? Cold Comfort Farm. His Yasha is almost exactly Rufus Sewell's character.
I'm mostly
in Cold Comfort Farm.
familiar with Rufus Sewell's Fortinbras in Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet, where Rufus Sewell plays his asymmetrically sized icy blue eyes to just complete unsettling effect. Because if you've ever looked at Rufus Sewell dead straight on, which is pretty much the only shot that Kenneth Branagh gives Fortinbras, you notice that he does have this kind of asymmetrical eyeball, which really works for him.
I've seen have I seen the Branagh Hamlet? No, I don't think I ever saw it. I've seen the Mel Gibson Hamlet several times, which is quite good.
The Branagh Hamlet is excellent.
Is Branagh Hamlet?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that guy.
I should check that out.
He couldn't cast himself as anything less than Hamlet.
Well, and my feeling is that the thing I've always said about him is that he's a better director when he's not directing himself. But I would be happy to be proved wrong in this case.
I mean, the cast is just astonishing. Derek Jacobi is Claudius. Kate Winslet is Ophelia. The list goes on and on and on. Brian Blessed, who is, if you've seen Kenneth Branagh's Henry V, he plays a very violent Gloucester. And it's just very good.
I remember kind of coated in armor.
Coated in armor. Yeah.
Right. What does His Majesty the Dolphin think about that? Says something like
tennis balls, my liege.
Tennis balls, my liege. Right. I remember that. Yeah, he's like a bionic.
Yeah, exactly. He gets a paragraph worth of acting out of those 4 words.
But anyway, Mark Bana, who plays Petya Trofimov as a Scot, the perpetual student who is not yet 30. And Craig Ells plays the passerby and plays him as a kind of on the edge of violence, unhoused person who might be, having a mental health breakdown at that moment. That he terrifies the other characters. And then Paul Dodds is the station manager, and then there are some ensemble
bunch of
casts.
Other people.
And then our adapter is Andrew Upton, and our director is Howard Davies. And I also think probably worth mentioning is Bunny Christie, the designer, because the design is very specific.
Yeah, it's so good. Let's see. I mean, you, I think, have the first I think you have the first question written
Well,
down.
we already started talking about this,
Yeah.
but my question for you is at least, and I have an example of this, and maybe we could do a scene study, but I found Lubov, as portrayed by Zoe Wanamaker, to be much more charismatic than the way I read her on the page. And part of it is that she's just exuberant, and she's home at one point. Everybody's talking with her about coffee and whether to sell the orchard and all this other stuff. And at one point, she just gets up and is like, yeah, and does this little like I'm home happy dance. And you can't, and I'm just wondering what you make of that choice, that performance. I certainly think it works fabulously. And it invests me in the story more so than the page, the text did. But what do you make of that? Do you think that she is picking out something that was in the text, or do you think they made a decision to change the character a bit from Chekhov's intention?
Yeah, this is kind of one of my questions for you about like characters that were perhaps the greatest distance from your experience of them on the page, because I really think that's the abiding joy and mystery of Chekhov, is that, and we talked about a little bit about this last time, that like when I did some scene study of this play of these characters for the first time and read it, I was perplexed. And then, through the like being directed by somebody who was only 22, but had 2 or 3 more years of theatrical experience, to be like, oh, okay, this is a script in probably the loosest sense of the word, and that really Chekhov's genius lies in the space that he leaves, not just for the audience, but for the actors. And you and I have talked about this, about his prose too, that there is so much room left to the reader to experience what, to sort of project their own life and times and feelings and emotions onto the sort of screen that Chekhov has set up for us. And I really do think that his genius is that good or bad performance is there in the text. I mean, it's this very strange, like we could even talk about it as like nature versus nurture. Like, is it the text or is it the interpretation? And I mean, I really think it's both. And I think what a good director and a good actor are going to do, and I am going to answer your question. I'm going to say whether or not, I would say that the great Chekhov performances are 2/3 interpretation and 1/3 text. And I think it's amazing that Chekhov had the humility as an artist to recognize that was his part to play, was to give actors and directors and designers this kind of marvelous scaffold that played correctly could encompass all parts of the human condition, and then played poorly is like when you see a bad Chekhov play, it is unbearably bad, because usually the problem is that people just get up there and say the lines, and these plays, I really think, live in what you do outside of the lines and outside of the text, and that's why I love this production so much.
Well, I'll also note, and I have a few examples I'll point to in a moment. Assuming that Mamet is relatively faithful to the literal translation, this is heavily rewritten. The language is heavily modernized. And I was thinking about it, you could do it with Shakespeare, but you wouldn't get away with it because you'd lose things like there's a method to his madness. That Shakespeare's language is so poetic that even though the trouble with Shakespeare for a modern audience is it doesn't sound like people talking the way we're used to people speaking English, so that can create a barrier. if you were to then translate it into modern English, there's no way you could preserve the poetry and the brilliance. But since we're translating, what's there to say that you can't translate Chekhov's Russian into modern English? Just as easily as you could have translated into 1907 English. And if you do that, you get things like bloody bollocksing, bloody hell, which Lopakin goes on that rant one time because, they're not listening to him about this or that. Or other moments, the whole thing about, you're still a virgin too, where Lubov really teases the student hardcore, probably as revenge for the day before he took her to task, in the prior act for being an aristocrat and things like that in a way that was deliciously awkward. And so I think that's part of what's going on. But I'm also curious, as somebody who's seen productions of this, my sense was they took a lot of liberties with Lubov. Yeah. And do you agree with that, or is this pretty much in line with how Lubov is portrayed?
They're all So I think what you get out of casting Zoe Wanamaker in this particular role and allowing her to do what she does is Zoe Wanamaker's face can look like it's about 8 years old and can also look like it's about 80 years old. And she has like her features are small and sort of elfin and childlike at times, and that allows her to really like exist in the full spectrum of emotions that this character has, which is like titanic. But then also, when I was watching this production, the thing that stood out to me the most about her performance is the number of times that she has no identity other than the identities that she allows other people to craft for her, or that the cherry orchard supplies for her. And there's these moments when she's talking about men and I don't know who I am without them. And she loses one and she instantly, it's the old, the quickest way to get over somebody is to get under somebody. Yeah. And you do get...
Which, by the way, is not true.
No. Okay. Yeah, listeners. If there are anybody out there who thinks... Oh.
I mean, it's sort of true, but it's like basically saying the only way to get out of the foxhole is to get blown up by a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, perhaps, that saying would be better rewritten as, if you would like to temporarily defer the pain of rejection...
And create some new problems.
Right, yeah. It's debt. It's not a good idea. Ranovskaya really doesn't know who she is, and she has no identity other than what she allows other people to kind of paint for her. She's lost her youngest child. She's been used financially, probably sexually, and now the one thing she has left is being turned into summer homes.
It's funny. Her song in the modern pop canon would be "When Will I Be Loved?" Right? I've been cheated, been mistreated. When will I be loved? Yeah. And Lopakin's song is "Gumboots" by Paul Simon.
Oh my God!
Trying to rearrange my position on a friend of mine who had a bit of a breakdown. Breakdowns come and breakdowns go. What are you going to do about it? That's what I want to know.
Is Trofimov 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover? Or is that...
Gosh. Yeah, Trofimov is like Eve of Destruction.
Oh, God.
Well, I'm talking about the Barry Maguire folk song.
Oh, not the Metallica.
Not the Metallica, right. What I would actually say, though, is that I think Zoe Wanamaker finds another identity for Lubov. In the book, her kindness comes across. But she, to me, seems really mopey. And this... Zoe Wanamaker's Lubov does mope a little bit, but she also has got this tremendous vitality, and she takes pleasure in everybody around her. Yeah. Fears, both her daughter, her stepdaughter. She's constantly like kind of cuddling with Anya and with Varya. She's sort of kind to the servants. Even though Lopakin is kind of a fly in the ointment, she's still generally kind with him. Even though Trofimov is kind of a fly in the ointment, she's still generally kind with him. At one point, she tells him off, but then she apologizes and sort of wins him back.
Yeah.
You know, and there's just that moment where the neighbor says, "Did you eat frogs in Paris?" And she says, "I ate crocodile."
Yeah.
With this just like delicious relish of like, and I think that to me it creates this identity for her that I didn't see on the page, which is an ability to allow community to buoy her in the midst of difficult circumstances too. And I'd love to do a short reading to sort of illustrate this. I also think they made a change and they amped up the drama. And this is Lopakin first laying out his scheme of how they're going to save the cherry orchard. This is sort of, he's starting to explain it to Lubov. They've been back for like 20 minutes.
Yeah. Like she's been like literally
she's
on a
tired.
train.
She's having her coffee
from Paris.
She doesn't really want to hear. Yep.
Rent them at that price, and I assure you, by fall, not one plot. You won't have one plot left. You'll rent them all, which is to say one thing, and that's congratulations. I congratulate you because you're saved. Fine land, deep river, put in a sand beach. And what it is strikingly perfect, all right? You clear the land, the old buildings, the house will have to come down, but it's served its turn. Yes, you cut down the cherry orchard, and then...
Cut? We'll have to cut down? If I may, in this whole province, I can't think of...
Sister...
It's all right. What is there? The one thing of note happens to be our cherry orchard.
No. It's no. All that it is big. One crop of cherries every 2 years? And who buys the crop? No one. It rots.
It's all right. And then Gaev says, even in the encyclopedia, that cherry orchard. Okay, so that's where I wanted to stop.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I'll note is that in a page or two later, it is Gaev. It's 2 pages later. Lopakin is still going on about this plan, and at one point, Gaev just cuts him off and says, "What vicious nonsense you speak." Mm-hmm. So it's Gaev who says that. Now I'm going to play you the audio of the National Theater version of this scene.
Subdivide the cherry orchard and the land around the river into lots. Subdivide and build holiday homes. See, holidays are the future, trust me. Subdivide and people will pay for a little bit of the motherland they can call their own. A, there's a huge seasonal rental market. B, there'll be second homeowners. And 3, there are groups of owners taking shares. Now, they're the main avenues for now. Concentrating on that alone, I estimate I can clear you a guaranteed income of 25-30K a year.
Oh, pong.
Clear.
Poo, pong.
After tax.
I don't quite understand you, Yermol Alexich.
Holidays. Leisure. Here, now, this place. 2,500 rubles per annum per quarter-acre block. Get it on the market now, and I guarantee you by autumn you won't be able to move for holiday makers. In a word, thank you, Lopakin, we are rich. You people are on the perfect spot on the river here. Nice, deep bend, fishing, sailing, swimming. Little bit of a tidy up over the summer, little things. Take down all the old buildings, fence off around the old house. You can keep this house on a block for yourselves. Still get great views to the river from the back bedrooms. Chop down the cherry orchard and we're ready.
Chop down? Excuse me, young man, but do you have any idea what kind of rank garbage you were talking? What a nonsense. 25 of this on little bits of that and all marketeers in autumn. A fence here and a bend in the river there. Chop down our trees. If there's anything even remotely significant or of interest in this miserable little backwater, it is our beautiful cherry orchard.
That such a huge piece of land should be so completely unproductive. Ha! Cherries? Cherries, anyone? No one eats cherries. Madame, no offense. My dear lady, no one even eats cherry jam. No one bothers with cherries. And even if they did, even if they were suddenly to become the most popular fruit in the whole wide world, you lot are lucky to get a moth-eaten crop every second year. The fact is, it's just a lot of trees blocking the way to the water, which is the pretty bit.
That lot of trees is mentioned in the encyclopedia. Yeah, that obstacle to unencumbered water sports is considered to be of national significance.
So I'll stop it there. You know, it's pretty much the same, but a couple differences I note, and one is the antagonism between Lopakin and Lubov is much stronger. And it's even in the script, and it is Lubov who says this is idiocy, this is nonsense. In the version that we just read, she's wrapping her head around the idea. She's like, "What? Cut the cherry orchard? No, you can't. What?" She's kind of behind, and in this one, she's like, "Cut the cherry orchard? What nonsense!" You know, and it just amps up the drama between those two. And I think the heart of this play, to me, and I sensed it when I read it, but I really see it, is the relationship between Lopakin and Lubov. Yeah. And so I think this is better, but it does seem to be taking some liberties with the translation.
And that's...
in order to achieve it.
And that's what you... Okay, so let's see. It's really... I mean, like, we can't really talk about Chekhov without talking about Shakespeare. And I think you're so right, where it's like, you can't change the language of Shakespeare. But since we are so far removed from that world and that experience, the problem with bad productions of Chekhov is they just read what's on the page.
Yeah.
And if you did that with a Shakespearean play, it's a disaster. It's just like, it's a bad poetry reading. And what you have to look for is those clues where you're like, oh, he wrote half a line, and then the next character finishes the line of poetry. So that line, there can't be a pause there. That's 10 syllables that has to be read in the meter of the play. And then, you also begin to, it depends on your interpretation of the character to how Hamlet is going to say words to Polonius. Is that about Polonius, or is that about Hamlet? Is Hamlet pretending to be mad? Is he mad? And you can do that with these plays, with the Chekhov plays, in a way that I think, because it's close enough to our experience, and it's close enough to sort of a flavor of play that we probably are used to seeing in high school. Like, if you've seen your high school's production of Our Town, you're like, ugh. Yeah. And if you have seen a good production of Our Town, you are still dealing with the trauma. And I think that the reason why I like this production so much is that everyone commits. And the director commits. Like, Act 2 opens with Dunyasha and Yasha very clearly hooking up in the field outside the barn, and Yepi Kodov sort of stumbling upon them.
Rousts them. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I think we've talked about this before, that the times that I've been in productions of Chekhov plays that have really worked, I think a few weeks ago, you and I were talking about football. I think we were talking about soccer, and we were kind of talking about why Lionel Messi is such a different player. Because you either make space as a football player, or you're either a playmaker, so you're passing into space, you're either a defender, you're containing players, you're containing the ball, or you're a goal scorer and you score goals. Lionel Messi somehow reinterprets the soccer field every time he's on it in a brilliant way. And he can see the things that we can't see. And a good director of Chekhov is like, you know what this needs? For the sexual tension of this whole production to pay off, Yepi Kodov, who loves Dunyasha, needs to stumble upon her doing something inappropriate with this cad, Yasha, that is suggested.
And then it makes sense that he pulls out the gun, then you're sort of like, oh, okay. I mean, it's still stupid, but it's not as random as it reads.
There are a lot of lines that when you read Chekhov, you're like, this doesn't make any sense. And then in a good
Yeah.
director's hands, you're like, oh, that was a joke. Like, that's like half of the stuff that Gaev says that on the page comes across as mean in this production.
And I wonder how much of that is also just the translation to idiomatic language, too. That you have so many choices about how to translate this literal phrase that, you know, I worked on this video where we interviewed somebody who was speaking either Russian or Ukrainian, and he said, you know, they always say that life is not a walk in the woods. And my editor said, you know, he looked at that translation, we had it as a lower third subtitle, and he's like, let's just make that life isn't a picnic. And I was like, oh, you know, and he was a good enough, and he didn't speak Russian, but he was a good enough, he had a good enough literary mind to recognize what the gesture, that there is a Russian equivalent to life is no picnic, you know, and that he posited that the expressions were roughly equivalent. And I think a good translator is making all sorts of decisions like that all the time, too. And I like the decisions that our translator for this one
I think this is a really
made.
good... The reason I picked the Mammoth for these two, you know, there is a better acting text that that I think is probably like if you're gonna pick something to actually mount the production, would be the translation I would use. The Mammoth is interesting because it's so far from the original. It feels like he takes some real licenses with it, and I think you'll really see that in Vanya. But you know, like once I got to see Ben Kingsley do a directing masterclass, and it was something like Ben Kingsley does a directing masterclass of Waiting for Godot, and I was like, I have to go see that. And so he gets the actors down into the stage. They've prepared, they've got their parts memorized, and he's just sort of like, okay, show me what you've done. And they kind of do it, and it's sort of okay. It's Waiting for Godot, but they haven't really done anything with it, so it feels pointless. Yeah. And he kind of stands up, and he sort of looks around, and he like leaves the stage and comes back with a mop, a dust mop, and a broom. And he hands one to each of Vladimir and Estragon, the actors playing them. And he goes, do it again, but this time I want you to clean up. Yeah. And it just took off. And all of a sudden you were like, oh, these are friends stuck doing a very tedious thing. And the reason they keep saying this is because there's nothing else to do. And the fact that he was able to see that in that moment is like what we were like, oh, that's why Ben Kingsley is like such a great actor, such a great director. And I think Chekhov plays that do that like, they come up with things to do that aren't in the text, but that suddenly elevate it into what feels like real life. I mean, the reason Chekhov on the page does not read like real life at all. And then Chekhov on stage, you're like, oh shit, this is the way that we talk. Yeah.
Well, and again, I think part of it is that Andrew Upton made a very specific decision to be more colloquial in the translation and more modern. Another one of those moments like that is when Lopakin is sort of like maybe going to propose to Varya, even though he doesn't, and then Charlotta escorts Gaev out of the way to give them privacy, and there's this moment as they're walking off where Gaev just says, oh, you know, where he realizes what's going on, you know. And it's funny, and it's very real.
You know, I think I was so perplexed by your dislike of Gaev the last time we talked, because I have this Gaev in my brain, this particular Gaev who is a buffoon and who is a jerk, but you get the sense that like he's kind of harmless, but he's also not harmless at all. Like he is your very awkward uncle who doesn't stop talking. No, he's Uncle Dick.
Well, I hope Uncle Dick isn't listening.
Uncle Dick doesn't listen to Upper Middlebrow.
But I also don't. I don't feel like I saw that charm in Gaev. I did see Lopakin's charm. I did see the student's charm. I saw Lubov's kindness. which I think comes across on the page. But again, I think they're making, and maybe if you look really closely, there are these clues there. But I wonder how much of it is looking really closely, or how much this is what I was alluding to earlier, which is this sort of oral history of the theater, right? That if you're brought into the theater community, you perform this in drama school, and you were directed. And you were directed by people who were probably performing this play at some point themselves, and they were directed by people, and they are full of this knowledge, like, okay, this is Lubov's character, And I mean, I think one of the choices that both Mamet makes and that I think they make in this one, I think my interpretation, the reason that Lopakin does not propose to Varya is not because he chickens out. It's because he actually loves Lubov.
I think you're right.
And
I think this...
And I think in this... Yeah.
This production really sits on that. And I was like, as I was rewatching it, I was like, oh my God, Jesse is right.
There's a moment where she says, don't you want to propose to her? And he says, to be honest... Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think what he bites off is, to be honest, you're the one I love. And then even there's a moment where she says, okay, well, are you going to propose? And he says, not without you. And it's in the book slightly differently. In the book, the translation is, I don't think I could do it after you leave, or something like that. But this interpretation is not without you. And he looks at her plaintively, and she turns back and says, splendid, I'll go get her, or something like that. And she misses it. Yeah. Or maybe she sees it and, doesn't return his feelings. And so, I'm sympathetic for Lopakin, and I actually think he probably makes the right choice, because he's not really in love with Varya. And it would be an act of kindness to propose, and he would be doing it to make Lubov happy. I think he respects Varya, and would be doing it to kind of help her out too, to be a good dude, essentially. But that was a really powerful moment for me in this, and I think it really came across in this performance too. And I would say I watched it again today, and I got a little choked up at that moment. To me, that was the most plaintive.
Watching that moment, and then for me, the moment that kills me is Varya like collapsing onto the ground afterwards. I mean, the reason I love Chekhov is for the poignancy of the missed opportunity. Like that's the thing that, and to kind of answer your question about like the sort of like theatrical, like the Chekhov theatrical industrial complex is like you never really see an okay Chekhov play. It's either fantastic or it's really bad. And so the kind of cheat code that I think that you're kind of alluding to of the like, people that are in the theater who sort of like assemble, like some like what has been done before. But I think actually the reason why you're seeing that is because the people who direct these plays well know that the way in is to do less, is to like both do more and do less. So like add in things that make the world bigger and more real, so like taking the wanderer and like taking from him, like on the page, like the wanderer is sort of somebody who comes through and asks Lubov for money. She gives it to him. And it's another reason for Varya to be like, oh my God. But it's a demonstration of her irrational kindness and behaving as though she has money when she, and there are multiple times, I think even Gaev says, like, Lubov has not learned that we're not rich anymore or something like that. There's she still has the habits of something like that. I can still hear you, but I need to go to my bookshelf, which sadly my bookshelf has suffered an incident. I have a cheap bookshelf. This is like the opposite of Gaev's. Maybe I hope you can still hear me. But I have a cheap bookshelf, and the back panel of it doesn't really stay attached very well. And so there are times where it will become a flexible bookshelf, and a flexible bookshelf is no bookshelf at all. A flexible bookshelf is one that, tosses its books onto the floor. But what I'm looking for is my book of E.B. White essays. Because there is a moment in Goodbye to 48th Street when, and I can't find it, so I'm just going to come back and reprise it. But in Goodbye to 48th Street, he and his wife are trying to move out of a New York City apartment. And a friend of theirs comes, has said that he will purchase some of their books. And the friend shows up and begins packing up the books. And as they are talking, the friend mentions that his brother has died recently of cancer. And he leaves with the books, and E.B. White says something like, after he left, it seemed as if there were twice as many books and twice as much sorrow.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm just, and I think in this production, that bystander widens the world. You suddenly realize that the world is not okay. Like, it's not just the cherry orchard that's a problem. It is everything. And that is, and I really think that is, excuse me, I'm having some technical issues, but here I am again. I think, I'm really happy you're enjoying the production, because I think this production is such a way into Chekhov where you're like, oh.
Well, and I'll to my credit, to past me's credit, I suspected that would be the case. That I felt like I was struggling with what was on the page a little bit. And I said this last time, I did pick up some of the themes.
Yeah, I mean, you got the fact that Lopakhin probably is in love with Lubov, which is I was like, oh shit, I never even thought of that. And now I'm like, I really think that's true.
Well, and I mean, what's the very first thing that happens in the play is he's woken up and he starts talking about how she cleaned up his bloody nose. And he is trying to save the estate for them because he wants to do something for her to help her to gain her regard, and it's not, you could say it's selfish, but it's also, he is legitimately trying to help, and he is legitimately flabbergasted, that they're not taking him up on it. And then when he realizes they're not going to go for it, the next best thing is owning the estate where his father was and serfed, and essentially at least becoming Lubov's social equal by becoming a landowner, which doesn't get him what he wants exactly. And nobody really gets what they want. The other thing, I think the other thing about this performance is that Trofimov still talks, I still find him to be kind of babbling, but there's a real... the performance is imbued with a kind of sincerity and nobility that where he doesn't annoy me as much in this performance. And there's also that moment where he and Lopakhin are sort of having their farewells, and
you have the hands of a poet.
And he says, I don't need Lopakhin tries to give him money. He's not having any. He's like, I don't need money. I have, my ideas. I have my youth.
What I need is my galoshes.
Right. And he eventually finds them, right. But then he says something like, I don't remember how he puts it to Lopakhin, but it's something like, I think you're completely wrong about everything, but you're still a pretty good guy.
Yeah.
And Lopakhin is moved by that, and I think he's moved by it because I think, that's all he wants from anybody in this play. He just wants Lubov and Gaev and everybody to just be like, you're a good dude, And I follow that story particularly well, and I think it's the heart of the play, and I think the two best performances were Zoe Wanamaker and Hill. He has an interesting first name.
Conleth Hill. And I would put Trofimov, the actor who plays Trofimov, in there too, because he does do such a good job of taking that literally sophomoric points of view about workers and happiness, and Lopakhin and Trofimov are the two sides of the capitalist socialist coin. And what's amazing about Chekhov is that both of them come off equally buffoonish and sensible.
Yeah, and they both represent the new, too.
Yeah.
They both represent... The old order is changing. These are two visions of the new order. They're two competing visions.
Yeah.
And they don't agree. But I also think that one of the things that really... You get it a little bit in the book, but what just really comes across in this performance is these characters all, despite the fact that they're bickering, that they disagree, that they're unproductive, that they're kind of blind to each other's affections, that they're blind to each other's ideas, they all enjoy each other's company. And and there is something ultimately redemptive about it.
Yeah.
So even though it is tragic, I don't know what's going to happen to Lyubov and Anya. I kind of feel like they'll be all right. Maybe the cycle repeats. I don't know what's going to happen with Anya. I mean, somebody like that probably has to marry, or Gaev gets a job at the bank, which I'm like, why would you want Gaev working at your bank?
Well, and Lopakhin even points that out. He's like, he's not going to last. There's no way. He's lazy. He's a noble. He can't work. He's not part of the... Yeah, I mean, this is such a play about, like... And Lyubov and Fears are the two kind of stand-ins for the past. Fears the distant past, Lyubov the recent past. But the past.
A question just occurred to me, and I think it can be my last question.
Yeah.
Of all the things we've considered on Upper Middle Brow, which story does this resemble the most? Something just flashed into my brain.
Could be Parable of the Sower or The Arrest.
I see The Arrest.
What's coming up for you?
Big Night.
Oh shit! Yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah, and I think
the last great effort, the loss of the beloved dream.
Yeah.
But we still have each other.
Yeah. Yeah. The hug. Yeah.
Wait, here's an interesting and I think that's a good example. And I mean, an interesting choice from Chekhov here is. We've talked about the sacrifice, the blood sacrifice, right? Like in The Kite Runner has a happy ending, but to get to the happy ending, basically in a serious drama, if you're going to get a happy ending, you have to put your characters through hell.
Yeah.
If it's a comedy, maybe not quite as much. It could be funny hell as opposed to like terrible hell. It could be embarrassment hell as opposed to like you lose your best friend to the Taliban.
Yeah.
So that's one of the and what's interesting is that Chekhov has earned enough that he could give somebody a happy ending, right?
Yeah.
Like Lopakhin is the closest, but he doesn't really get what he wants. He gets the means, perhaps, to get what he wants, but he nobody gets what they want in this play, and I think that's a really, really, except maybe Yasha, right? Like, because he gets to bang the maid and then, bugger off to
back to Paris.
Where he's got probably another lover waiting for him. And he is the crudest and probably least admirable character, particularly in this portrayal, since Gaev comes across as, a bit more sympathetic. I guess the neighbor, Pilchik, he gets his lucky break.
Yeah.
Which is it's almost like, but what do you make of that? What do you make of the sort of abandoning of the narrative physics? I mean, usually we like our characters, and it's painful to give them sad endings. And if we're going to, there's a temptation to at least give somebody a happy ending, and Chekhov resists that.
I think there are a few writers. I mean, so like Grace Paley comes up with this quote that all people, real or imagined, deserve the open-ended possibilities of life. I might not be getting that totally right, but that's the idea.
No, you've said that before. Yeah.
And that word deserve is doing a lot, because deserve can mean, that it just means that you reap what you sow. And I think all of Chekhov, like the prose, the plays, he kind of floats free of literary convention in everything. So it's like he's a rule breaker because he sort of like got the rule book and was like, no.
and he's so facile with the principles behind the rules that he doesn't need to follow the rules. And there's a physics behind the rules, and that's what he's working with.
The physics that he is playing with appears to be like the emotions of human condition. And you're like, how did you figure that out? I mean, he dies when he's 44. He dies younger than us right now, having achieved what he achieved. And it's like one of those things where you're like, okay, some people, for whatever reason, are given a direct conduit to the soul of humanity. And I think Chekhov was one of them, like Virginia Woolf is another. Shakespeare is one of them. Like, there are these people who just have that sensitivity in a way that like the rest of us can evolve, but he really had it. And so he's able to do things that in a lesser writer's hands like would just fall apart. Because what's happening at the end of the Cherry Orchard is that the narrative is unraveling. This narrative doesn't end. It just continues in the way that sad lives continue.
Yeah.
And you're like, he thought this was a comedy?
It's also prescient, too, because the optimism of the Russian Revolution is completely frustrated. It's a complete tragedy.
Yeah.
And, the liberation of the serfs was a true good, but everything after that, you're just replacing one czar with another, with a Politburo czar,
what a great term.
And everything is
Politburo czar. Oof.
It's just as oppressive as it was before. Yeah, no, Putin is just like a czar, and wields the same kind of power. And I'm ready to go to trivia. I feel like
I was curious about the moment that Lopakin announces that he bought it for you. Like, did that change anything for you about him as a character, or did it deepen anything for you about him as a character?
Well, I just think they amped the drama up with all of it. But that was one of my favorite scenes on the page, too. And he's drunk, and he's wallowing, and he's smothering, and it's a moment where he doesn't come off the best. I thought that was true on the page, too, but it's also... I mean, in the same way that I liked it that Lubov was meaner to him, I think their relationship is sort of at the core, and so having them antagonize each other a little bit more makes it a better story. Yeah. I sympathize with him. I hope that if in a moment like that, I wouldn't gloat, but I totally get why he would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So
we've talked about how great this cast is. Many members of this cast have relatives who are also in show business.
Oh, my God.
To great acclaim. So which relative of one of the stars of this play won a major award in show business?
A major award? You can't say major award without A Christmas Story, like leaping into...
I don't know what Christmas Story is.
It's a major award. I won a major award. One of the characters wins a lamp that is sort of a sexy leg lamp.
Right.
Yeah.
I do. I've seen the photo of the sexy leg lamp. I didn't realize it was a major award.
It's a major award. Okay. Yes.
So which relatives of one of the stars won... Let me edit. A significant award in show business. Was it A, Sam Wanamaker, father of Zoe, won an Emmy for the pilot episode of the neo-Western TV show Lancer in 1971, which he directed.
I need to go watch that.
B, Ronan Hill, brother of Conleth Hill, won an Emmy for sound designing Game of Thrones in 2018. Or C, Mark Bana, is that his name?
That's some relation of Petya.
Yeah. Mark Bana's brother, Connor Bana, won a Tony.
Connor Bana.
Connor Bana won a Tony. It's funny who he portrayed, too. Won a Tony for his portrayal of Babby Bobby in the Broadway run of The Cripple of Inishmaan in 2014.
Oh, fuck. These are all...
So you're getting your curric ready, Babby Bobby. It's one of the lines I can remember from that play.
Oh, my God. God, what a writer! What a writer Martin McDonagh
I'll ask
is.
you one more time. So you're getting your carrick ready. Great play.
Now I just want to do lines from In Bruges. I am gonna go with the last one. I'm gonna go with the Tony for the Cripple of Inishmon.
It was B. Ronan Hill, brother of Conleth Hill, won an Emmy for sound design in Game of Thrones. The two brothers both worked on the same TV show, and Conleth Hill tells a story of how they were together when they filmed a scene in this one part of Ireland where they had both grown up near.
Oh
and it
my
was
God,
his
that's
sort
amazing.
of favorite moment.
Yeah, that must have been incredible.
I forget what it was called, but it was one of those amazing Northern Irish cliffs in a scene with Daenerys, and I don't even know if Varys was there. Yeah, and actually Ronan won several Emmys for sound designing specific episodes of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I mean, the production, say what you will about Game of Thrones, the production values are insane.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Production values, performances, some of the scripts.
Yeah.
I think that there were excesses, and I think there were some misfires.
Yeah.
But it was a very, very well made show, and
it's effective.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in 1920, one of the great writers of the 20th century saw a production of The Cherry Orchard and said, "The beautiful mad drama, which I had staged often in the dim recesses of my mind, was now hung within a few feet of me, hard, crude, and over-emphatic." Which literary great is here heard savaging a production of The Cherry Orchard? Was it A, F. Scott Fitzgerald, B, Ernest Hemingway, C, Virginia Woolf, or D, a very young Larry Niven?
I think Larry Niven was born after, what was it, 1912? But you said it was what was it, with date on the production?
I just said a early 20th century production.
Early 20th century. Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Virginia Woolf.
And I can give you the quote again if that would be helpful now that you know the putative possibilities.
Yeah, can I have it one more time?
"The beautiful, mad drama, which I had staged often in the dim recesses of my mind, was now hung within a few feet of me, hard, crude, and over-emphatic."
I mean, it's funny, over-emphatic does sound like savaging. Everything up to that point, to me, sounded like a glowing review.
It's interesting. You could, what work is hard and crude doing? In this particular, I can see what you mean.
Yeah, just like, ripped the tragic reality of day-to-day family life is presented in all of its crudeness and boldness. I'm going to say Virginia Woolf just because that seems to resemble her prose better, and I just have a feeling that Fitzgerald and Hemingway would both like it more.
You got it.
I'm going to go with Virginia Woolf.
Congratulations. Way to go. It wasn't Larry Niven.
Yeah.
I think, I applaud your close reading. Cause I was like, it could be, I was like, it's not Hemingway. Like this sentence.
Hemingway would be like, what a load of tripe.
Yeah. Hemingway has never said, "The dim recesses of my mind was now hung within a few feet of," there's too much.
Yeah, that phrase has never left his.
There's too much
Fitzgerald
stage.
could have written that, but I feel like Fitzgerald is more aligned with what Chekhov's doing here than Virginia
Fitzgerald.
Woolf.
There'd be more like bombast. There'd be like more Chabon. And what I think is so cool about that quote is that it really shows us that it's the power of the production, really makes, in the same way that Shakespearean plays are completely reliant on the production. And you have to go into Shakespeare and Chekhov with this weird double vision of utterly revering the text and yet knowing that you have to do something more than the text, than these texts that like these, like 40% of the greatest writers of the last 500 years have come up with.
Yeah. I don't speak Russian, so, but if I would say seeing the Moscow Theater Stanislavski performance of this play would be way up there on my list of time machine activities. And in particular, because apparently Chekhov didn't like the performance so much. And, it's tragicomic. I even looked up whether the word tragicomedy existed prior to this.
Interesting.
And it does.
Oh, cool.
It does. I found a reference to tragicomedy in 1845 or something like that. And there were even plays that would describe themselves as tragicomedies in the 1840s and 1850s. But I thought that was interesting. Remind us what is next.
So first, I will read this play several more times before I am dead. I will read this play 100 more times before I die. I
don't know if I'll read it again. I would certainly love to see a live production of it.
Yeah, when you
I'll
see
probably make that happen at some point.
we should make a pilgrimage to see a good production or something like that. Apparently, Ian McKellen just wrapped up. I'm not sure if I got the dates right. Ian McKellen was in a production of The Cherry Orchard within the last few years, and I was like, oh, God.
Could he have been Fears, or he would have to be Fears or
Fears
Gaev,
or Gaev, I think. Well, how about okay? So you will go see a production.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll read it again, but I think I certainly would love to see a live production of this.
Yeah. Well. Thanks for listening, everybody. Upper Middlebrow is a Small Point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes have a plan to save your estate. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by me, Chris Bagg. And you can learn more about us and find our listener survey. We're just going to keep asking until we get 10 people to fill it out at uppermiddlebrow.com. And please review us in your podcast app. It really helps other people find the show.
Last time I checked, we were up to 7.
Ooh, 3 more?
I haven't checked in a while.
3 more,
so,
folks.
Yeah, all we need is 3 more, and we'll stop blathering about that.
Yep.
Oh, but we gotta save the date. Wait, I'll do the and a reminder.
Yes.
It's funny, we both did like Saturday Night Live Rob Schneider Orgasm Man. And a reminder, Chris and I are both writers and editors and can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. And if I'm doing the math correctly, this is episode 63, and this is our last series of season 2, which means that we are soon to do a draft, as we like to call it, where Chris and I select the next roughly 12 books or movies we're going to consider, although this time our plan is to select 5 series, and one of those series will be a listener choice.
Yeah.
So if you show up to the live draft, you can vote on an Upper Middlebrow series. And we have a date for that, and that date is October 10th at 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So you could check uppermiddlebrow.com. You can check our social media accounts for an update. Stay here, but at some point we'll put a link for how you actually participate in the live draft, where you, listener, can help determine the listener's choice series of a future Upper Middlebrow series. I'm so excited to hear about all of the things that we hear suggested. I've been thinking about this draft since the last draft, which was like about this time last year. We were closing in. Listeners, choose carefully, because we're about to chart the next year of what you read. It will be about a year, because I think we're gonna pick about 15 or 16 works. So that usually for us would be 32 episodes, and we do about 32 a year. But that's exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. Again, the date is October 10th, 5 p.m. PDT. Stay tuned for details. You can always check uppermiddlebrow.com. The night of, I'm sure the link will be there if it's nowhere else.
Speaking of Saturday Night Live and the Muppets, I learned last night that season 1 of Saturday Night Live had a recurring Muppets skit for all of season 1. And apparently, I don't know if Lorne Michaels was part of the directing team in season 1, but apparently whoever it was and Jim Henson did not get along.
Lorne Michaels he's
been there since the
charge.
beginning.
Yeah. There's a biopic, or am I mispronouncing
We
that?
both are.
I always thought
We both are. It's biopic.
Oh, well, I disagree. I think it's biopic, biographical picture.
Yes.
If you want to call it a biopic, you're welcome to. There's
I'm
no
not going to
standardization.
describe people who are nearsighted as myopic. And so that is my way of getting around to that.
Right. Well, myopic is spelled with a Y, and it has I believe, Greek root, whereas biopic is a portmanteau of biographical picture.
Yes.
The first 2 syllables of biography is bio, and the first syllable of picture is pick, and therefore Jesse Dukes will be saying it as biopic heretofore. But you do what you want, Chris Bagg. It's a free country. We're not living in, Soviet America-stan yet.
Not yet. Things can change.
Yeah. Oh, but what are we reading next time? We're reading Uncle Vanya.
Yeah.
I actually couldn't find a Mamet translation, so I found another translation that has a black cover. That
I can once again send you the link, but also, we could also. I mean, the other thing is like it might actually be kind of interesting to read like 2 different translations, and it might cause us some trouble in it. Have you already started reading?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. Send me the link. Also, it might be at my local library, and I love to patronize the Los Angeles Public Library.
I know, as you proved by showing me that you were going to be becoming a supple leopard out of
my hold is placed. It'll be waiting for me at the Mar Vista branch in a few days. See you next time.
Godspeed.
Dogs gotta walk.
Yep.
Dogs gotta walk.
Dogs gotta walk.
Dog speed.